Extract from the dispatch of General Viscount Wellington to Earl Bathurst, reporting on the victory at Salamanca, 22nd July 1812. I ordered Major General the Honourable E. Pakenham to move forward with the 3rd Division and General de Urban's cavalry and 2 squadrons of the 14th Light Dragoons under Lieutenant Colonel Hervey in 4 columns to turn the enemy's left on the heights, while Brigadier General Bradford's brigade, the 5th Division under Lieutenant General Leith, the 4th Division under Lieutenant General the Honourable L. Cole, and the cavalry under Lieutenant General Sir Stapleton Cotton should attack them in front, supported in reserve by the 6th Division under Major General Clinton, the 7th under Major General Hope, and Don Carlos de España's Spanish Division, and Brigadier General Pack should support the left of the 4th Division by attacking that of the Dos Arapiles, which the enemy held. The 1st and Light Divisions occupied the ground on the left and were in reserve. The attack upon the enemy's left was made in the manner above described, and completely succeeded. The cavalry, under Lieutenant General Sir Stapleton Cotton, made a most gallant and successful charge against a body of the enemy's infantry, which they overthrew and cut to pieces. In this charge, Major General Le Marchand was killed at the head of his brigade, and I have to regret the loss of a most able officer. The account of Major General Sir Benjamin D'Urban of the Battle of Salamanca, recorded in his journal, July the 22nd, 1812. Upon the morning clearing, my patrols and lookout officers made out very clearly that the whole of the enemy had passed the Tormes by the ford of Machacan near Ancianes de Basho, and had marched by Machacan upon Calvarasa de Abiacho. This was reported to Lord Wellington by General Pakenham at about 10. His lordship broke up from the valley of the Marte, where he had held his army during the night and morning, and laid the troops in position along the hill which ran parallel to the heights of Gargavate. At about 12 o'clock, by Lord Wellington's order, the 3rd Division, with my brigade, crossed the Tormes, and we took post in reserve, upon, or rather behind, the heights between La Panilla and Aldea de Jade. Marmont was moving all day, and there were several sharp affairs of cavalry, and a good deal of cannonade. At 4:30, Lord Wellington observed that the enemy was determined upon turning his right, and resolved to attack him. The reserve, 3rd Division, was ordered to attack the heights occupied by the enemy's left. I was directed by the Commander-in-Chief himself to move in 2 columns of lines upon the right, to cover, protect, and cooperate with it. Note, Lord Wellington came down from the neighbourhood where he had been examining the enemy's left at a rapid gallop, accompanied only by Colonel Delancey, but followed immediately afterwards by Colonel Sturgeon, and gave us orders for the attack verbally, first to me, whom he had first met with, and then to General Pakenham. All this was done. The battle became general, lasted for 3 hours, and ended about 8:30 o'clock, in a complete rout and defeat of the enemy, who lost about 10,000 men. The Marshal was most unfortunately shot through the body in making a movement with the 12th Regiment of Portuguese Infantry, which saved the 4th Division. The account of Captain William Bragg, 3rd King's Own Dragoons, at the Battle of Salamanca, given in a letter to his parents from Flores de Avila on July the 25th, 1812. My dear Father, knowing the anxiety you and my mother will feel upon hearing of the great and sanguinary battle, in which the 3rd Dragoons bore no inconsiderable share, I take the earliest possible opportunity of informing you that I escaped perfectly sound, wind and limb, together with the little bay mare who carried me through the day delightfully, and I believe to her speed and activity I may in great measure attribute my marvellous escape, as I at one time had to gallop along the whole front of a French brigade, retreating in double-quick step. I have often heard you say, after reading the public dispatches, that you could never make anything of the history of a battle. Therefore, I shall not attempt to describe the fight at Salamanca any farther than what happened in our immediate left and right, which was simply this. Marmont endeavoured to turn Lord Wellington's right, and had taken possession of a hill in that direction, but the British hero rather counteracted this intention by having detached the 3rd Division still farther to the right and to General Pakenham, with most of the cavalry drawn up in line on the left of General Pakenham, as if to keep up the communication between the 3rd Division and the rest of the army. At least this was our situation about 3 o'clock, the French keeping up a tremendous cannonade on the cavalry and infantry, our people not firing a gun until 4, when I believe Lord Wellington gave the signal for a general attack, by opening with 6 18-inch howitzers. Immediately upon this, our right and left turned theirs, the enemy were driven from the hills, and the cavalry advanced upon the backs of the infantry. Our brigade literally rode over the regiments in their front, and dashed through the wood at a gallop, the infantry cheering us in all directions. We quickly came up with the French columns, and charged their rear. Hundreds threw down their arms, their cavalry ran away, and most of the artillery jumped upon the horses and followed the cavalry. 1 or 2 charges mixed up the whole brigade, it being impossible to see for dust and smoke. But this kind of attack, so novel and unexpected, threw the French into confusion, and gave our infantry time to get another battle at them, when they served it out nicely, making them fly in all directions. We lost our general in a square of infantry, and in him we have experienced a severe loss. 1 lieutenant was killed by his side, but in other respects our loss is trifling, considering we were solely engaged with the infantry and artillery. The brigade marched off 9 pieces of artillery and about 500 prisoners. We marched to Alba de Tormes on the 23rd, and this day the whole army halts. We passed by the heavy Germans yesterday, and saw the ground where they had gained immortal honour by charging 3 squares of infantry, breaking them and capturing 1,600 prisoners. Lord Wellington was a spectator, and declares he never saw so gallant an affair. Our loss will, I should suppose, not exceed that at Badajoz. The French estimate theirs at 16,000. Lord Wellington certainly underrates it at 10,000. We know of 19 pieces of cannon and 5 eagles taken besides, standards and colours innumerable. French generals were wounded, 1 taken prisoner. Marmont had his arm amputated at Alba de Tormes, and was conveyed from hence on a litter borne by 12 grenadiers. Sir Stapleton Cotton was wounded by the Portuguese. We have frequently been employed lately, and on the 18th had the credit of saving the 1st Hussars, and the 14th from a perilous situation, so that the heavy dragoons will, I trust, be in a greater repute than formerly. The night before the action we bivouacked close to Salamanca, and scarcely linked the horses when a tremendous clap of thunder bursting over their heads, the whole brigade broke from their moorings and dashed over the men, wounding about 50. The night dark, rain in torrents, French at hand, and the horses at liberty in a country as open as Salisbury Plain. Only conceive our confusion. We recovered all our nags, but the 5th lost 18 horses. P.S. An account has just arrived of the death of Marmont, Bonnet, and Marshal Beresford. You will receive this letter nearly as soon as the Gazette account, as it goes with the dispatches which are to be conveyed to England by Lord Clinton. You must excuse the writing, for although sub tema intenti, I am not exactly lentes in umbra. In other words, I lie down under a scorching sun to write on a blanket. Until last night, I have not had my clothes off for a fortnight, and have seldom been under the cover of a tent, but continue well. We are on the high road for Madrid, probably with the view of taking or making the French destroy their immediate stores at Segovia. With love to you all, believe me, your dutiful son, William Bragg. The account of Lieutenant and later Major General Norcliffe of the 4th Dragoons at the Battle of Salamanca, in a letter to his family. My beloved father, thanks to the Almighty and to the very great care of my surgeon, I am quite out of danger from the severe wound I received, but it was perhaps the most hairbreadth escape that ever was heard of. The skull was just injured, and the 10th part of an inch more must have consigned me to an eternal rest. We were pursuing the French infantry, which were broken and running in all directions. I was cutting them down as well as I could, when in the hurry and confusion I lost my regiment, and got with some soldiers of the 5th Dragoon Guards. On looking behind me, I could only see a few of the 5th, and we were in the centre of the enemy's infantry, amongst whom were a few chasseurs and dragoons. Nothing now remained but to go on, as we were in as much danger as by going any other way. I rode up to a French officer, who was, like the rest, taking to his heels, and I cut him just behind the neck. I saw the blood flow, and he lost his balance, and fell from his horse. I perceived my sword was giving way in the handle, so I said to the officer who lay on the ground, "Donnez-moi votre épée." I really believed he was more frightened than hurt. I sheathed my sword, and went on with his. I had not gone 10 yards further before my horse was wounded in the ear by a gunshot. He turned sharp round, and at the same instant I was shot in the head. I turned giddy, and fell off. I can recollect a French dragoon taking away my horse. I was senseless a few seconds, and when I recovered, I saw the French dragoons stripping me of everything. They began by turning my pockets inside out, to look for money, which they stole, my sword and sash, hat, boots, and spurs off my feet, dragging me along the ground in the most barbarous manner, saying, "Ah, Anglais, vous n'êtes pas à cheval." Another said, "Ah, je sens bien le garçon, il m'a poursuivi." In fact, I never saw such usage in my life. "Allons, donnez-le-toi," said another. I shook my head, as much as to say, "I am unable to rise," when he held a sabre over me, crying out, "Je vous mettrai au coup de sabre." At last I was left by the cavalry, and the French infantry came all round me, and I expected the same treatment. Judge my surprise when I experienced quite the contrary. "Courage, mon ami." I asked for water, being very faint from the loss of blood. "Ma foi, je n'ai point de l'eau, pauvre garçon." And another, "Êtes-vous officier?" I stammered out, "Oui, du 4e Régiment des Dragoons." Presently, an officer came up with 5. Each took a leg and an arm, and the 5th supported my head, which was bleeding profusely. And I will say I never saw more men more careful. If ever I groaned, owing to the pain of being carried, they said to each other, gardez-vous, camarade." They carried me into the very centre of the French column, close to a very fine battalion of grenadiers, with great bearskin caps. I rested here a little, for I was very weak, and a great number of French officers came round me, and were most particularly civil. One colonel of grenadiers poured some brandy into a cup, and wanted me to drink it. I just wet my lips. He then ordered 5 grenadiers to fall out and carry me further into the wood. I made a sign that I would rather be carried by the men who brought me there, fearful of falling into fresh hands. Our infantry was at the time advancing again to the attack. The 5 men who carried me were desired by all the French officers to take particular care that no one ill-used me, and that if I could not get away, I was to be laid under a tree. The 5 men, seeing our infantry advance, laid me down very carefully under an olive tree, and each of them shook hands with me before they left me, and said, "Je vous souhaite bien, monsieur." And they also desired that I would remember they belonged to the 65th Regiment. Our infantry, I could now see, though it was getting dark, were bayonet to bayonet, and I had at last the pleasure of seeing the enemy running in every direction. I had the presence of mind to take off my jacket and cram it into a bush, and as my boots were off, I lay as if I was dead. And when they were running away, they all passed my tree and took me for a Frenchman. Several of the musket shots from our men struck the back of the tree where I was, but I lay very close to the root. Drums, muskets, and everything they could not easily carry were thrown away by the enemy. One Frenchman was wounded by a musket ball in the side, and fell close to me. I waited till the French had all passed me, and then ran as far as my strength would let me towards our riflemen. I was so delighted at getting back, I actually threw my arms around the necks of our infantry. They led me up to where the 6th Division was, and I fell down, quite exhausted, at the feet of the Grenadier Company of the 32nd Regiment. This is the 2nd horse I have lost in action, as also my saddle, bridle, collar, sword, sash, musket, boots, and spurs, and pouch. My beloved father will see I have been obliged to draw largely on the agent owing to these losses. It was a glorious day for our brigade. They behaved nobly. 4 men killed of the troop I commanded, and several men and horses wounded. It was a fine sight to see the fellows running. And as we held our swords over their heads, fall down on their knees, drop their muskets, and cry, "Prisonnier, monsieur." You see I am not born to be a prisoner. Love to my mother, Norcliffe, Norcliffe.